Welcome to Moving Panels One Shot. This is a mini episode where my guest and I will discuss a single topic that we felt deserved a short little conversation. Joining me today is the creator and host of the 80s flick Flashback, Tim Williams.
Thanks a lot, Laramie. I appreciate you having me.
Oh, it's great, and I'm looking very forward to this short little conversation. I'm not going to call it a debate because I don't think we're going to pick sides on this, but Tim and I talked about what we wanted to discuss, and what we came up with is that today we are going to discuss whether the Arrowverse, so the CW shows, Arrow, Supergirl, Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, possibly even Black Lightning thrown in there, should they be a part of the DCEU? So at the time of this recording, the DCEU, the DC Extended Universe, which is their movies, is kind of in flux. The Justice League was not that great of a movie, and so they kind of hit reset, but yet some of their characters are doing really well. Wonder Woman, Aquaman, even though he wasn't in Justice League, Shazam did really well. Yep. And so the question is should they stay separate, or should they maybe try again and do another Justice League with different characters, possibly even doing some sort of crisis, which DC is known for, which would cause a merger of universes. Now, CW's Arrowverse just did this past year. They did the Crisis on Infinite Earths, and the end of that movie, I say movie, it felt like a movie. The end of that miniseries actually had the DCEU Flash, Ezra Miller, meet the Arrowverse's Flash, Grant Gustin, and they spoke. So that is what led open to this debate. And so that is what we're going to discuss. Should the Arrowverse come into the DCEU? So what say you, Tim?
Well, I would think, my personal take is, I think that they should start with the Arrowverse to build the DCEU. I think what it was before should kind of like be what it was. I would kind of do like, everybody's going to have the DC versus Marvel theories or, debates. And so, unfortunately, what DC did is they tried to copy what Marvel did, but they tried to do it too fast. So you went from Man of Steel, BVS, Justice League, or, BVS, Wonder Woman, Justice League. And it's like you didn't have all that time to introduce all these different characters to kind of build it up, because you're adding the Flash. In Justice League, you added the Flash and Cyborg and Aquaman, who we had not seen until that movie. So I would think, let Wonder Woman have her movie. If you want to do an Aquaman 2 sequel, that's great, but kind of let those be standalone for now. But then take the Arrow that we know from the CW, the Flash we know from the CW, even like Supergirl from the CW, give them that full movie treatment, and then let those kind of build, and then you can start implementing, Aquaman back in and Wonder Woman back in, and give us a 5 to 2, well, I say 5, give us more of a 10-year plan to get there instead of trying to rush to make it happen in 2 or 3, which seems like what they did last time.
Well, people forget that it was only a 4-year plan between Iron Man and the Avengers, because Iron Man came out in 2008 and the Avengers came out in 2012.
They were cranking them out pretty fast. That first, well, because you had Iron Man, Incredible Hulk, which most people don't want to talk about, but those came out the same year. Yeah. Then you had Iron Man 2, I think was right after that. Then Thor, then
Captain America.
It gets fuzzy at that point. Captain America. No, because Iron Man 3 didn't come out after Avengers.
Yeah.
So
because Iron Man 3 is dealing with the aftermath.
It's been a while since I went back to the beginning of the MCU. But even a 5-year plan. But like I said, if Arrow gets a movie, and let's say 2022, Arrow gets a movie, then Flash in 2023, Supergirl 2024, then you can maybe lay some groundwork in Aquaman 2. I guess this point would be Wonder Woman 3, because that Wonder Woman 2 is pretty much already done. But if you're laying the groundwork on those, you can kind of sprinkle some stuff in to bring them in later, where you're kind of sowing a few seeds.
Okay, I like your plan, but now there's a bigger aspect to that. So you're talking about a Flash movie. Well, is that Grant Gustin or is that Ezra Miller? Because Ezra Miller is still, as far as I know, contracted to be the Flash in the movies.
Right. Yeah. You bring up a good point. So maybe, yeah, well, they've seen each other in that Crisis on Infinite Earth. So I don't know if we want to get into this, but, the idea is the Flash movie is going to be a Flashpoint where there'll be multiple universes, multiple, I guess, timelines. Was that what that be? Would you consider that?
Yeah, no, the Flashpoint storyline would be the perfect opportunity for them to bring in new characters that we haven't been established to, or bring in the Arrowverse. But like I said, you're not going to do Flashpoint with Ezra Miller only to replace him with Grant Gustin.
Yeah, that's true. So it makes it harder to do. But once again, it's I don't know. Once again, you talk about starting with the Arrowverse, but Arrow isn't even a show anymore. The show that
not
started
only that,
is now...
but he's dead.
Right, exactly. So I don't know. Now you got me second guessing my thoughts.
But you still have the whole concept of Flashpoint can bring people back from the dead. I mean, they did it in the Arrowverse.
At the very least, I would like to see them get some love in the movies, the CW actors and those characters. So even if it is a cameo, kind of like Ezra Miller did in the TV show, if that happened in something like Flashpoint, it would be interesting to see. Maybe you pepper in a few, but you can't, like I said, you can't use Flash, but you can definitely use, you can use Supergirl, that she's set to be a different timeline because her Superman's different than Henry Cavill's.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Arrow's the only really Arrow, Legends of Tomorrow, Batwoman, Black Lightning. Those are, and I guess now Stargirl, as she's been added to that mix as well. So those you could still, I guess, build into the DCEU.
Well, you mentioned Batwoman. You kind of start walking a thin line there because they introduced their version of Bruce Wayne in the Crisis storyline.
Yeah,
so,
that's true.
But again, I could see what you're saying. You're saying more of in the DCEU, keep it separate from the Arrowverse, but just pay a nod to them, kind of the same way the Crisis did their little homages to all the other DC properties. And they had Tom Welling from Smallville. They had Burt Ward from the 60s. They had a clip from Titans and from Swamp Thing that are on the DC Universe, HBO Max, whatever you want to say now. So yeah. So if that's the case, are we saying don't bring the Arrowverse in? Because that would just be, like you're saying, that would just be acknowledge that they exist, but they exist in another universe the same way the Crisis did at the end.
Right.
And so ultimately, based off of that argument, we're almost saying don't put them in the movies. Don't have Stephen Amell's Arrow fighting alongside Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman.
Right. Well, I don't know. Once again, I think if there's a way to merge them together. You just got to be very meticulous and cautious of how those worlds cross over. Like you said, if you're using multiple timelines, if that's what Flashpoint is going to do, then you can. But once again, you don't have anyone in the Arrow series that's going to conflict with anything in the DCU. So you could have Amell's Arrow fighting with Gal Gadot. Of course, it has to be in the past or bringing it back to life or how that works. But again, I don't know. I guess for me, I would like to see it because I followed the CW shows, maybe not all the way from the very beginning. I came in kind of late. I came in on Flash and then went back and binged Arrow and caught up. And then, I've kind of added the other ones. I'm not as big into Legends of Tomorrow as the others, but I would like to see them kind of get their due in more of a movie fashion. Even if, once like I said, even if it's a cameo or at least some kind of a nod, maybe not getting their own standalone movie, but I would say, to kind of somewhat correct what I started, but I would say if they really want to build the DCEU, which I think is what they intended to do, I would start with a character like Arrow and build from there, and then add your kind of like what once you're gonna follow the Marvel model. Iron Man was not the most popular Avenger when they brought him out. They started with a lesser known superhero character and kind of built from there. So which is kind of what the Arrowverse did. I mean, Arrow wasn't that well known either or as popular. I mean, the reason I didn't watch Arrow at the beginning, I remember watching the very first episode, but it seemed like a knockoff to Batman to me. So I didn't feel like it was.
Green Arrow is.
Yeah, yeah. So I was like, I don't want to see a cheap knockoff of Batman, or they have a Batman show. But then, as I heard people tell me how great it was, I had and then once I saw the Arrow episodes where they had their crossover, I was like, oh, let me go back and watch Arrow. Maybe it won't be so bad. And I really enjoyed it and watched all of them until the very end.
So would you ultimately? And again, I'm totally accepting of having them make an appearance in like a Flashpoint movie, and at least acknowledging them. But what would you think, considering DC has stepped out and said, like, for instance, the Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix, the Joker movie exists in a different universe than Justice League. Right. So what if instead of the Arrowverse inserting themselves into the same universe and timeline as the Justice League characters, what if they just had their own movies?
Right. I'm okay with that. Yeah.
So I think ultimately what I would worry about is kind of the same problem that Marvel has run into. They created Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and it was supposed to be connected to the movies, but then they realized how inconceivable that was, because you're going to have incidences that happen in the movie that would then have to be felt on the show. But then how do you do that without either A, spoiling the movie, or B, having the show work without those characters appearing in the movie?
Right.
And so eventually Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. had to completely disconnect themselves.
Right.
So.
Well, yeah, they have a problem too, because Marvel was cranking out movies, and then at the same time, storylines were always, you had broad strokes, but as more detail and stories got kind of scaled down to what they were actually going to film, I don't think trying to figure out where to put Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in it, especially after Captain America, when S.H.I.E.L.D. kind of was dissolved anyway. So there really wasn't any way for them to really connect. But I think they had issues of finding out what was going on in the movies to then have the TV writers work that into their storyline some way, and kind of keeping both sides well informed and with the same storyline.
Yeah,
it was tough.
And I think the Arrowverse within themselves are starting to run into that problem. I mean, because you can't help but think when you watch, and I know Arrow has ended its series, but you can't help but think that when something was happening on Arrow that didn't just affect Star City, but potentially affect the entire world, you're like, well, where's the Flash? Like, clearly they know each other. Why wouldn't the Flash show up? And now that they've done Crisis, and spoiler, they've merged it so now Supergirl exists in their same universe.
Right.
How does Supergirl deal with a lot of the, extraterrestrial threats that she's usually dealing with without it also affecting Flash? And then the Legends of Tomorrow are going through time and messing with time. How does that not, how is that any different? They've made it so clear in the Arrowverse that when the Flash has gone through time and messed with things, he's screwed everything up. But that's what the Legends do every episode.
Right.
And so.
Yeah. And you kind of got that same issue even after Avengers. They had to kind of cleverly put in the lines, because you had the big Avengers movie, the first Avengers movie, then they all had their individual movies again. And it was like, well, now you've got to create dilemmas for them that are big, but not so big that, hey, why don't you just call the Hulk to come and take care of this? Or why don't, you got Captain America on speed dial, just, can he come help you out? And, you got to be extra creative to do that. But yeah, I think Crisis on Infinite Earth was kind of like their big swing and they kind of got to do everything they really wanted to do as far as a big crossover. I think even to the point now, of course, without Arrow, but I even said, I think next season, once that season actually comes, they're not doing a big crossover. They'll do like smaller crossovers, like 2 shows, but not all of the shows together. Yeah. Because you kind of they've got to build back up to that. It's hard to duplicate that year after year. I think the last 2 crossovers were really big and worked really well. So it's going to be hard to duplicate that, for this next season. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. So here's what I'm gathering based off of this, again, short discussion. Obviously, we'll do an episode down the road, full episode about maybe Crisis. But based off of this short little thing, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong after I make this statement, would we like to see the Arrowverse on the big screen? Yes. However, it might actually hurt them if they were. And considering DC, especially this Arrowverse, DC is so good at television right now. Right. And we've got a new Batwoman coming. We've got a Superman and Lois Lane series coming. They're building their Arrowverse. And so I think ultimately we are saying keep the Arrowverse on television. It will be fun to be acknowledged in the movies, but keep them on television. Yeah,
I think I agree with that. Like I said, give them a cameo here or there where it works in the story, or at least acknowledge them and the kind of, show, hey, we know you, we recognize that you exist and we appreciate what you're doing. But yeah, maybe not getting a full blown movie treatment for the Arrowverse isn't the smartest move right now. So yeah, I can sign off on that.
All right. Well, sounds good, Tim. And I think that gave some people something to think about.
Absolutely.
All right, well, there you have it. Something for you to consider. Please leave us a positive review, and you can email us at movingpanels@gmail.com if you'd like to suggest a topic for the show. So thank you, Tim. Anything you'd like to leave with?
Nope, just go check out 80s Flick Flashback when you get a chance. I appreciate it.
It's a great podcast. But for this podcast, for Moving Panels, I'm Laramie Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.
Hello, movie viewers and fellow movie lovers. My name is Tim Williams, and I'm the creator and host of Movie Views Presents the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast. See, I love the 80s, and I have a great appreciation and nostalgic passion for the classic 80s flicks that birthed my love for movies and ultimately helped shape my childhood. On each episode, I'll discuss, with a special guest co-host of course, a different film from the 1980s. We'll share memories, favorite characters, iconic scenes, and even share some behind-the-scenes stories along the way. We'll discuss famous blockbusters like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Coming to America, Ghostbusters, Dirty Dancing, Top Gun, Die Hard, and many, many more. As well as some other cult classics and even lesser-known flicks we discovered on cable TV or the now-defunct video rental stores. Remember those? No matter what 80s flick we choose to talk about, we'll always have a good time, so come and check us out. You can find the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast on major podcasting platforms like Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor, and more. Be sure to subscribe or follow so you don't miss a single episode. Once again, I'm Tim Williams, and I hope you'll join me for the next 80s Flick Flashback.